this kind of goes back to that budget thing, right? Like when you're making a first century, like nothing exists, right? Like these, we have to make it all.
Sooner or later, gotta cut you down.
Chad Gundersen, good to see you again.
Come on, man. Good to see you. Thanks for having me out. Come play with you guys.
That's right. How's
Good to see you, Chad.
Oh, Texas is Texas, man. It's as we can talk about this later, but we like to say we're kind of in second place behind the motherland. That God's chosen land of Israel, and Texas is great, man. Everybody's coming here, which is always funny.
Yep.
There's been all these great migrations over the last few years, and Texas and Tennessee and Florida, and all these places that everybody's going to. So we welcome you. We welcome you. Welcome to Texas. So.
And you were a part of you're a part of kind of that big incentive package that got passed over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, Texas has always been a pretty decent film hub. But I like to say, look, Texas doesn't need to incentivize people to come here. People just come here, right? And so
Yeah.
I think with the film industry, I mean, there's a rich film history in Texas, going all the way back to things like Giant and all these kind of old classic films that have been around. So Texas has always had that, but obviously since incentives kind of kicked in, call it 20 years ago, when incentives really started going, Texas has always had something, right? A little bit, but nothing huge. And to a certain extent, I think it hurt Texas. I think what people do is they learn that the incentives, I like to say, look, don't chase incentives. That's my biggest thing. When people chase incentives, I always use the example. I remember watching some Disney movie with my kids when they were younger. And they were trying to cheat, the bayou of Louisiana for the beaches of California. And it was just like, come on, like it was such a stretch. And you could, that was just, but at the time, Louisiana had these huge incentives, right? And so it is what it is. But, I've just always been of the opinion, don't chase incentives. If they're there, obviously take advantage of them. But, when people start making decisions solely on that, well, I think that's a pretty dangerous place to be. And so Texas has always had some incentive, but not the best. And I'd say there's a couple of issues with their incentive that definitely has gotten better over the years. And one of those is just the amount of money in the incentive.
Right.
Texas, they renew their incentives every 2 years, legislation they gather, which they're about to gather this year right now, and do it again. And so 2 years ago when they did it, it's kind of been in this kind of 20, 30, $40 million range, which to be honest with you, that gets eaten up pretty quickly, especially with shows like ours. And we live in Taylor Sheridan land. So he obviously is here doing a lot of stuff. And so it went from like 30 million up to 200 million in this last session, which was a huge jump and a great step for Texas. And yeah, Chris and I, and Out of Order, and a lot of people from The Chosen were a big part of that. Obviously Taylor and his people were a big part of that. And we just kind of, the joke started becoming, what's more Texan than cowboys and Jesus, right? I mean, that's about as Texan as it comes. And so that's again, Taylor is definitely the 800-pound gorilla in the room with all of his pretty crazy, awesome shows. But our little Jesus show, we've got some staying power, and we've been around. We're heading into our 6th season here, and so yeah, it's pretty exciting to see Texas taking some good steps in the right direction to keep production here.
That's awesome, man. And again, thank you for coming on the Production Playbook. We appreciate it, man. Now that we have you on and we got you on here, I want to talk a little bit about your journey, because it's easy. And I'm right, I can identify with your journey to a degree, but it's hard. And I try to tell people this all the time. It's not easy what we do. I mean, it's a grind. Especially there's one thing when you do it by yourself, and then there's another thing when you have a wife, family involved and people to support and to, hold you accountable. But man, before we get to where you are now, I like to go back just a few years, right? to when you just started this endeavor. Man, can you talk about in the beginning stages? You're from Texas. You're a biology major, right? And you start out as an actor. I know we're going to find a clip of you as an actor.
Mrs. Porter? Police?
Wendy?
Mrs. Porter? Police officer? Mrs. Porter? Ma'am, are you all right?
When? Stop resisting, sir. Get off! Get off!
Come on. Yeah, and so yeah, by a few years, if you mean a few decades, then yes, we can definitely go back there. Yeah, I grew up here in Texas. Unfortunately, I was not born in Texas. I was actually born in Nebraska, but we moved to Texas when I was 2. And my favorite saying is, I wasn't born here, but I got here as quick as I could.
Yeah.
As Texans like to say. But yeah, I literally I still live and grew up in the same small town that we moved to when we moved to Texas back in the late 70s or whenever it was that we moved here. And I grew up in this small town. My wife grew up in this small town, and now we live in this small town. So we are very much homegrown right here. Little outskirts of DFW is where we're at, and yeah. So I mean, I grew up pretty typical Texan, small town world, right? Where Texas high school football is king, and
Uh-huh.
everything else just is a very distant second. So doing that, I was fortunate enough to be good enough at football to kind of go to the next level. And kind of definitely looked at a lot of different schools. Nothing real big, mostly kind of a few smaller D1 schools, a lot of D2 and D3 schools, stuff like that. And so I ended up landing in a school out in California. And kind of looking back, you can kind of see how God kind of maneuvers and directs and guides. Some of it obviously is selfish things, because to your point, I did grow up with just a big affinity for film and theater and stuff like that, but never thought about it as a career. Like at no point when I was a kid did I have my little Super 8 or video camera and go, this is what I'm doing for a living for the rest of my life. There was never that. Although I did all those things. I worked at a movie theater in high school. I was a projectionist and a door guy and all those things, and made all the fun videos in high school and in middle school. I did a lot of theater as an actor. And I still have a huge respect for the theater. And I always say it like, if any actor says they're not working, then I just blame them, because there's always a local theater to go do something in, right? There's
Yep.
always that
Yep.
ability to sharpen that tool and to get better as an actor. Um, and so going into college after leaving Texas, went out to California, and ended up playing 2 sports there. I played football and volleyball out there. But let's just say God had different plans, and ended up at the University of North Texas. And UNT is a big school, a big liberal arts school. They have like literally the #1 jazz department in the world. I didn't know that till I got there, how big of a jazz and music and obviously big theater, big film
Mhm.
department, art, all those things. And so my first semester there, I got cast in like 4 student films. You see the little flyer and you pull the paper off and you go to the audition, and I got cast in like 4 of these student films my freshman year, or not my freshman, my first year at UNT. And that started kind of getting me into their film department and stuff like that. Made the decision to stay. And the decision wasn't based on the film side of it, just decided, oh, North Texas is cool because it's here local. I had a lot of friends that went to school there, was kind of close to home, but far enough away, that sort of thing. Um, and was continuing to be a biology major. Sports medicine is what I wanted to do. Playing sports and doing all those things, that was definitely kind of in my DNA, and that's what I wanted to do with sports medicine. So that's where I was headed with the biology major. And I stayed a biology major all the way to my senior year at UNT, and then switched to film. And that was kind of a big wake up moment, and I kind of say it today too, like, Lord, are you really sure this is what I'm supposed to do with my life, is make movies? And that sounds like a cool thing, but you also, your rational scientific brain as a biology person, you kind of go, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Fortunately, I have some amazing parents that just kind of encouraged me and said, hey, if that's what you want, and if that's what God's calling you to do. And I say kind of 2 of the biggest decisions at a young age that I really prayed about and figured out on my own was, 1, quitting sports, and 2, switching from biology to film. And so my senior year, I switched to film, and I basically have a degree in biology, just not a piece of paper that says I have a degree in biology.
Right.
But then did get a film degree, because I had been taking a lot of film classes. again, as your electives, right? Because again, had an interest in it, never thought of it as a career. And so I literally started my first company in college called Night and Day Films with a buddy by the name of Joe Scott. And he was kind of a writer, director, and I was an actor. And so by default, our company did not have a producer, didn't have that kind of lead type thing. And so I kind of became a producer by default. Like it was just, I had leadership skills, from sports and all those other things. And it was just kind of very natural for me to just step into that thing. I didn't know what a producer was. I didn't know what they did. And, I joke and say my mom still doesn't know what I do for a living, and I've been doing this for 25 years. And so, but, it's, so that's, kind of how it all started, started doing music videos for local bands and commercials and just all these things that anything you could point a camera at, and just kind of learn to produce on the job. I think I took one producing class at UNT, which was weird. They didn't have a lot of producing classes. They had one, but the professor and I didn't really see eye to eye. And I definitely didn't want to follow his path, the type of stuff he produced. So I kind of just had an aversion to him. But what I did find out was there was a producing for documentaries, development for documentaries class that I took. And I probably learned more in that class because of the idea that in documentary filmmaking, you're kind of all by yourself, right? It's a lot of one-man band. Like you just got to figure it out, whether it's legal, whether it's paperwork, whether it's releases, whether it's budgeting, the actual, all those things. And so I just learned so much in that class, just going, oh, okay, well, as a producer, you have to make it happen. Literally, it's in the name. You have to produce what you're doing. And just, again, kind of just had that ability or affinity to produce and just, I'm of the opinion I don't want people to follow me because I tell them to. I want them to follow me because they want to, right? That there's a desire. I definitely am very big advocate for a servant's heart type of mentality. Most people don't know. When I walk on set, even with The Chosen, anybody news, like who's the grip or the construction worker over there? Like they don't know because that's just not my thing. It's just not my style. I don't care. I don't need a chair. I don't need to be on camera. I don't need any of those things. I'm just there to do, and I'll get your coffee as well as sign your paycheck for you. Like that just doesn't, those types of things, just don't bother me. And so just kind of became that type of producer, very hands-on, very, kind of do attitude. And as an independent producer, you have to kind of do it all, right? So I line produce and I executive produce and I raise money and I did distribution and work with marketing. Praise God, I don't have to do as much of that anymore because I just like to make content. I just like to make movies and television. So it definitely has kind of shifted from that. So yeah, and it just kind of, after college, just started pushing and grinding and doing, and that's kind of actually where kind of the Dallas story, with Dallas and the relationship with him kind of kicked in just a couple of years after college, is when those relationships started to bud a little bit.
So you guys, so we'll fast forward just a tad. You guys met on Cliché. That's where you were a PA. This is a pretty cool story, though. You were a PA there, and then by the end of the production, you were the producer.
Right, yeah, one of the producers, yeah.
Either way, I can't give up until I bring the pesto down.
Again with the pesto.
Mandy, I need a favor.
Jack, you could get me fired. Yellow. You remembered.
You were my wife.
Yeah, I still am.
So I met Dallas. So Dallas's dad is Jerry Jenkins, wrote the Left Behind books, right? Pretty big book series, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And just was a fan of the books. And I literally hand wrote a fan letter to Jerry Jenkins, just going, hey, I'm a real recent film grad. I'm a producer, which of course I was not. And if these ever get made into movies, I'd love to be a part. And oddly enough, Jerry actually wrote me back and said, yeah, well, they actually are being made into movies. My son, Dallas Jenkins, is working on these. Dallas is a couple years older than me. And so he was already working with this company. And so he gave me Dallas's information. Dallas and I met. And Dallas and his dad were going to make their first movie. And I wasn't a part of that, but they only produced. They weren't directing or anything like that. And so then Dallas and I just stayed in touch, and he kind of was like, hey man, I'm directing my first film. It's a short film, shooting it out in LA. I already have a producer. I don't really need a producer. And again,
this is Midnight Clear, right?
No, this was Cliché. This is Cliché. This is still Cliché. Yeah. So So Cliche was Dallas's first directed short film that he
Okay,
did.
got it.
And this
Yep,
would have been
yep.
probably 2002, 2003, somewhere in there.
Right.
And he goes, yeah, but if you want to work on it, come on out. And so literally I flew myself to LA and I slept on Dallas's hotel room floor. And I actually had a buddy that lived in LA at the time. So I stayed with him some. And yeah, I was an unpaid PA on Cliche. And then just through the process of making that film, a couple of other things came up and I ended up helping a lot with post-production back here in Dallas and some other things. And so kind of, I earned the moniker of becoming a co-producer on it. Dallas knew that was a goal of mine, was to continue to produce. And so it kind of gave me that opportunity. And so we ended up being a unpaid PA to a co-producer, being paid a little bit. I think I did get a little bit, probably like $300, nothing crazy or anything like that, So, and then after that, Dallas goes, I'm about to direct another short film, Midnight Clear. And that one I actually stepped up and produced that Midnight Clear, the short film. And then we made Midnight Clear, the feature film. And then after Midnight Clear, the feature film was really kind of when my career started lifting off. So.
Life doesn't always turn out as we hope, does it?
You have no idea.
For the first time in my life, I feel alone.
Sometimes you do the right thing because it's the right thing.
You're loved and missed at the church. Taking care of someone who doesn't even know what you're doing, it makes you figure out what kind of a person you really are.
So you did Midnight Clear, and then after that, I guess I want to bring in the family component because once you wrapped up Midnight Clear, let's be honest, did you think you were on your way? Because, there's an ebb and flow. Because you might get a hit movie, and just like me, I would have the opportunity to be a lead in a project, an actor, and they think you make millions of dollars. I'm like, sometimes in LA, I was just enough to pay rent for a month, And
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So tell me about the family B, the B story here.
Sure.
How did your wife, or tell me about your wife, because I'm always interested because it's a hard business, and if your wife's not on board, you ain't going to make it.
Well, yeah. And let's just say, I'll totally rat her out because she loves to talk about these stories too. She was not behind it at all. I would say at first, when we first met, it was kind of like, ooh, this sexy filmmaker guy, and he's all artsy and, mysterious. And, and she thought it was all cool. Like when we met, and we were dating when we did Midnight Clear. No, when we did Cliche, we were dating, and she actually came out to LA and visited on set. We were just dating at the time, and then Midnight Clear, the short, and all those things. And then when Midnight Clear, the feature came around, we had just had our first child, so we were married by then and had our first child. And we just started. We put a lot of rules in place. My wife is an accountant by trade. She has a degree in accounting. And so she's very kind of like, what's next? How's it coming? When are we doing it? When is it? That sort of thing, and I'm like, I don't know. God will take care of it. It's not my problem. He told me to do this. It's not my fault, which, again, there's obviously a lot to that, but and so we just started putting rules in place. For example, we have a 2-week rule. We never spend more than 2 weeks apart. That's just what we do. So whether I'm traveling or whatever's going on, we figure out a way for us to see each other. And we've stayed pretty true to that. I mean, there's probably a couple of examples where we went a little over 2 weeks or whatever, but the 2 weeks isn't necessarily the thing. It's the desire to make sure that it happens. It's that we're putting a stake in the ground and saying this is important. And that's continued to carry on. Dallas has this. My business partner, Chris, has this. That family is just so important, and it's just such not the norm in our industry, right? I mean, there's 10 like you, 20 better. If you're not happy, get out of here. I'll go find somebody else, right? Like it's just that mentality. And if anything, I think that's definitely something that's helped us stand out a little bit. I mean, we get people begging to come work on The Chosen, not necessarily because of the money or any of those types of things. They've just heard about our culture. They've seen it happen in a different way than what they're used to, and it just has become that thing. And so it's definitely been a journey on the family. I've got 2 kids now, and both of them, they've just grown up on set. So they definitely don't think it's very cool what I do because this is all they know. I will say The Chosen is definitely, because it's gotten so big, all of a sudden now it's a little cooler, because their friends know about it and their friends' parents. And, they actually have friends that actually love and watch the show that are teenagers. And so that's been a big thing. But, again, there's just been that journey But I will say the probably biggest turning point for both our marriage within this industry and my career, we'll call it, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years into our marriage, and obviously my career, because my career kind of took off right as we are getting married. And, I did the typical thing. I waited tables and I was a personal trainer for a long time. And I did all these things, to make money. And so I always encourage people, make sure that you have a second job that allows you to do the passion.
Yep.
Because if you go get a full-time job, well, then it makes it very hard to go leave for a couple of months to go do a project or whatever. So at the time, I think I was a personal trainer, and that was great because I would go away for a couple of months and everybody would get fat and lazy, and I'd come back and they'd be like, we want to pay you a lot of money to get us back in shape. And it all worked out. And so, so that was a big thing for quite a few years. But my wife, she tells the story that, she was just kind of crying out to God one day, and I was gone and she was dealing with the kids. And I'm sure, my son was, throwing a tantrum or doing whatever. And she just got into that woe is me moment of, God, why, right? Why are we doing this? Why doesn't my husband go get a real job? Of course, now remember how cool it was when we started, but now it's not so cool because, the inconsistency, I would say, God has always provided for us. We've never not paid a bill. We've never not had what we need, but it's never been easy either, right? It's always been kind of that paycheck to paycheck type of thing for many, many years. And I think there's even still a mentality to that, right? I mean, it may be a little bit longer, but hey, the chosen could go away tomorrow. And that's just something we've always just said, it could just go away, right? And so she was just kind of praying about it, going, Lord, what's going on and why and all this stuff. And, we've all had those pity parties, right? Of why me, and I'm trying and I'm doing my best and all these things. And she got kind of slapped by the Lord a little bit. And he basically goes, well, is Chad your provider or am I your provider? Which is it?
Yeah.
And it just really kind of wrecked her quite a bit. Like just going, okay, you're right. Nope, I'm relying on my husband. And not that a husband doesn't need to be a provider. There's obviously truth to that. There's seriousness to that. But when you are looking to that, there's always an expectation that's going to be higher versus what God does. God just provides, right? And you just need to be taken care of that way. And that was the biggest shift when she came to me and said, all right, God just wrecked me and I'm sorry. And this is us doing this. It's not Chad doing this. It is us doing this. This is what we do for a living. Even if she has a job or whatever, it's the same thing. If she was, working as an accountant or bookkeeper or whatever, then we are bookkeepers. That's what we do, right? It may be her job and my job, but it's what we do. Yeah. And when that we mentality really kicked in, I mean, within months, my career just shot even more. Like it just opened the floodgates of just the unity that we had. Now, to be clear, that's not to say that it didn't, it wasn't easy or any of those things, but it really just kind of changed the trajectory of my career and the projects that were coming and the things that we were developing personally and other people coming to us to help and that sort of stuff. So it was a good thing, but you're absolutely right. It's not an easy path. It's definitely not for everybody. You better know that you're supposed to be in this industry because it will chew you up and spit you out and probably pick you up and do it again, just for fun. Yeah. So, but it's been a journey.
Just to piggyback on that just a little bit, we talked about your wife with maybe why me. Did you personally have a moment in your life like, why am I doing this? Was there any doubt or was there any questioning God, like, this can't be the life that you chose for me?
Yeah, this morning, I think I had that thought, Well, it's weird because I will say that once I knew, because again, knowing that, the idea that I didn't always want to do this, like that wasn't always the vision. But once I knew that this is what God called me to do, there was zero turning back. I didn't question. Now, I question in the sense of, am I doing the right thing? Where's the money? All these things, you definitely question those. But I always looked at it as a two-piece thing. Most likely, if something was going wrong, it was my fault, right? And I'm definitely, I'm not a big place blame on somebody else, and funny enough, Dallas actually taught me this lesson early on because when we were making the first Midnight Clear short film, something was going on and I was complaining about, this person didn't do this or this crew member or whatever. And Dallas just kind of looked at me and he goes, well, Chad, if you're the producer, everything's your fault. And I'm like, well, that's actually right? If you're the boss, if you're in charge, well, ultimately, and that's a mentality that I've always just kept and just go, well, if I'm in charge, then everything's my fault. Now, it may actually be your fault, and you and I will have a conversation later, and you may or may not stick around on this project. But at the end of the day, I hired you, right? I'm the one that put this piece thing together and all that sort of thing. So I've always kind of had that mentality. And so when things got hard, 9 times out of 10, it was like, all right, Lord, what am I doing wrong? Let me figure that out. Let me kind of get down that path. And normally he'll kind of show you. And then there are other times where, and I say this very cautiously because I don't want to sound in any way accusational towards God. But there were times where I go, all right, Lord, you told me I was doing this, so this is on you. You have to help me. You have to show me because you called me. And I had no doubt at all, like zero doubt that this is what God called me to do. And there were times where, and again, I use that term loosely, that I'm calling God out. Obviously, that's a pretty dangerous place to be. But just kind of going, all right, Lord, then show me, right? If this is what I'm supposed to do and you called me to do this. So there was a lot of that sort of stuff. But, producing movies and television in a small town in Texas, you don't have a lot of support, man. You don't have a lot of people. I mean, and heck, Nathan, that's how you and I, when we met in that Starbucks all those years ago, we were both kind of like,
Lake.
well, this is kind of weird that we're actually running into two filmmakers, because it just, you would run into actors and models and things like that, but actually not only that, but then also on the production side. And so it was an interesting time for us to meet because, you can encourage each other and you can kind of lift each other up and just kind of do those things. Cause it just does, you're out in LA and everybody and their dog is a producer, a writer, a director, or whatever. And 99.9% of those aren't doing it for a living. Right. And so I'm sure, and you lived out there, I was only out there briefly, and it was kind of before my career took off. So I never really had that experience. But here in Texas, like if you say that, most of the time people just kind of scratch their heads because there's a lot of commercial work and corporate work and that sort of stuff in Texas, especially in Dallas. Austin has a little bit more film, but mostly it's Hollywood coming, versus, and there's some with Rodriguez and Linkletter and all those guys down there. And so it's just, there's not a lot of people out here to encourage you in this industry. And so you're just kind of on your own and just scrapping and clawing and biting and all those things just to get there. And so, but no, there's definitely still times where it's like, Lord, are we sure? Did I miss it? Did I miss it 25 years ago? But, I love what I do, and I'm very fortunate and very blessed, awesome. and just love it.
So we're going to progress the story now to a couple films. I know Jacob has some questions. He's chomping at the bit there. I feel like I've been talking too much. But
let's do it.
So let's talk about I guess a couple films like Dandelion Dusk.
After you went away, I found out I was pregnant.
What?
Gave the baby up for adoption.
Can I drive by myself, Daddy?
You can drive when we get outside of the marina, okay, bud?
We need to get our son back.
We're gonna tell Joey the Porters are just friends.
Can I give you a hug?
The next time we'll refer to them as the other mommy and daddy. And on the final visit, he'll be told the truth.
Come here, baby. I want to stay with you.
It'll be okay. We'll be right here when you get back.
No.
What do you want, Rip?
I want my son, okay, and you can't have him.
And then from there, you went to Unlimited.
So where am I?
Well, I assume that you know you're in Mexico.
I'm at an orphanage.
Who the pleasure do I have?
Pleasure of Simon Orwell.
Let's just call him a helpful scientist.
Most people look at these kids and all they see are future drug dealers and thieves.
Know that you can do whatever you want to do. Go wherever you want to go. Look at there, look at there. I just wanted you to know that I was here for you. I don't care what you've done.
You really want me to read that book, don't you?
God has a wonderful plan for each of us.
Never quit, dude.
This is what's possible.
I can't believe it.
This is amazing.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved with those projects?
So after Midnight Clear, basically, especially within the faith space, I kind of became that guy of have Chad produce your show, right? Like, and I don't say this, I say this more as a fact versus an opinion. I think you can kind of go look at a lot of people that I worked with after Midnight Clear that had made quite a few films, and the film I made with them, I would argue that's the best film that they've made. Right. So right after Midnight Clear, a movie by the call The Secrets of Jonathan Sperry, which was done by Rich Cristiano, and Rich Cristiano has probably directed 20 movies, maybe more. And I would argue that Secrets of Jonathan Sperry is his best film. And then went from there and did The Trial with Gary Wheeler, who's directed a ton of stuff and produced stuff. He's at INSP now and produces and directs and writes a ton of their stuff. And The Trial, I would argue, is one of Gary's best films. And so it just kind of became this thing. Have Chad come and help you, because again, with production and just the nuts and bolts of it, I just kind of really started going down that path. And so Like Dandelion Dust was right after that. And that was definitely a bigger film. It was kind of put together by Fox Faith, which Fox Faith, I think, is actually kind of making a comeback right now. But this is when the studios were starting to kind of get involved and, Passion of the Christ and, some of these other movies were starting to come out. So everybody was kind of starting to go, hey, there's something here. Again, it's still kind of struggled. And I think there's another resurgence right now between, The Chosen and like House of David and some of these other big projects coming out. And so, yeah, Like Dandelion Dust was cool because it was an interesting one because it definitely had a mainstream feel. Barry Pepper and Cole Hauser, right, from Yellowstone was in that. Mira Sorvino, we had some pretty legit folks in it, but it was a Christian book, written by one of the best-selling Christian authors out there, arguably the best-selling female Christian author out there. And so Karen Kingsbury. And I think the unfortunate part about that one, and again, I think it's a great film. I encourage a ton of people to see it just because it is just a good film. But I think one of the problems that we had is because we had this kind of mainstream feel to it. The book itself had a lot more Christian elements to it, right? And obviously, when you turn a book into a movie, things have to change and get moved around and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think it just kind of lost a little bit of its nuance when it went to film. And I think it turned into one of those projects that was too Christian to be secular and too secular to be Christian, right? And so it kind of missed both markets, even though everybody agrees. And it won all kinds of awards and festivals and all these things. And it did okay. It didn't do poor. It just everybody was anticipating it to do so much better. But I think that's kind of what happened with that one. But it was, it was a great film. That would have been like in 2008 or so, 7 or 8. It was during the strike, right? That big writer strike that happened during then.
Right.
And so,
Yeah. 8, 9. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a great film. It was, we shot it in Florida, and it turned out really, really well.
Chad, can you kind of go into some details about this genre, this Christian genre? I feel like it's changed a lot in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. Do you see the Christian genre growing and evolving and getting to a point where it's competing more with, more secular Hollywood shows and major productions? How did you observe this evolution of the Christian genre?
Well, one of the big things when I started was kind of, especially getting into this, right? Because I've been offered so many projects that I've had to turn down because they're just projects that I wouldn't touch, right? And again, but that reputation of mine on the production side of making things really great, and one of my oldest sayings is, I hate crappy Christian films.
Yes.
And I just, whether it's bad quality, bad, production, bad acting, bad writing, all these things. And just for the longest time, it was just this, oh, well, because we slapped some God in here and we have a message and there's a dove that landed on somebody's shoulder backlit. Now all of a sudden it's this amazing thing. And I was just like, well, wait a minute, we are called to do things in excellence, right? And so that was a big thing for me as a believer, but even as a filmmaker, I mean, take the faith out of it altogether. I'm like, I just want to make good stuff. Like, that's what we should have a desire to. Yeah. Like, right. If you're a home builder, I don't think your goal is just to make crappy homes. I think, regardless of the level, you want to make a great home. And so why would that be any different for filmmakers or entertainers or whatever that is? And so that was really a big focus of mine, which is probably why I kind of started getting that kind of reputation, because I'm like, I just want it to be good. I don't care what the budget is. I've learned how to stretch a dollar and make it great and do all those things. And I definitely, within probably the last 10 or 15 years, you had the exceptions probably 20 years ago, things like Passion of the Christ, things like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and Lord of the Rings and all these things that were more allegorical versus just straight faith. Right. So there definitely every now and then was this exception to the rule, but the baseline in the faith space was pretty poor produced, right? And so, but the audience didn't care. It's kind of like, there's those, schlocky rom-coms and horrible horror films that they don't care how bad the quality is. Like, just cut somebody open and show me something gross and cool, or do me the rom-com cheesy thing, right? And there's plenty of examples of those kind of cheesy rom-coms, and they don't care what the quality is because people just don't care. So there definitely was not this desire by the audience for it to be better. But now all of a sudden we are starting to see that shift. Where is this desire? And so I kind of go, well, this is kind of what I've been training for my whole life, right? Like, this is it. Right. And obviously when The Chosen came together, The Chosen, I like to say, is this perfect storm, right? Like, it's the best of everybody that's been a part of this at that level. It's the best thing Dallas has ever written and directed. It's the best thing that I've ever produced. It's the best thing that the DP's ever shot. Like, you know, the production designer, and there's a lot of these people that I'd worked with, like the production designer, James Cunningham, is an unbelievable production designer. But this is the best thing he's ever done, right? And it's just, so it's kind of became this perfect storm where that's what filmmaking is. It's a collaborative process. And if you get everybody working at their top of their game, it can become this something great. But it starts with the script, starts with the kind of leadership and all those things. And then you put these people in place. And as a producer, Chris and I, my business partner, we like to say, as producers, we like to create environments where creatives can thrive. That's what we want to do. And obviously we are creatives as well. The Chosen is one of the few projects I haven't had anything to do with the creative process on the writing side. But you read it and I'm like, I don't need to touch it. It's great. Dallas and Ryan and Tyler, they've made amazing scripts. Like, you don't need my notes. You don't need my thoughts. Now, every now and then something may come up, but it's pretty minor. But it is something that I'm not used to being a part of that. So I'm just focusing on making this thing look and be and stay on budget and all those things. Because while we have grown a lot with The Chosen, it's definitely, you know, we should be 4 or 5 times the budget we are, you know, going into season 6 of a, you know, global hit sort of thing. So
well,
yeah,
a good producer can stretch a dollar, right?
Yeah, right. Well, you know, and it's definitely something, you know, as you grow, you just want more. And obviously we do. We want it to be great, but again, you just have to be very. But I also think that's something that the studios are starting to realize, right? There's just a lot of fat. There's a lot of fat. Chris, my business partner, Chris June, he was at Sony Pictures for years and years, you know, and he's produced $120 million, you know, CG features and things like that. And even he's like, yeah, there's just waste, right? And again, it's not waste if you make something for 100 million and it makes $500 million. Well, then that's not really waste. You can call it whatever you want, but it made $500 million or $1 billion or whatever it did. So you can't really say that it's bad, you know, but at the same time, you're like, you probably could make that same movie for 20, 30, 40% less, if not even half. And so that's been a big focus of ours as a company, as Out of Order, is to just continue to make great content at a high quality and hopefully keep those budgets a little bit more reasonable.
All right, so Chad, we're going to work up to The Chosen. And so I want to talk a little bit about Unlimited, Hoovie, and then that big project that fell apart, because, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, Chad's doing The Chosen now, but it could be a little rocky road up until you get that flagship, you know, show. So tell us, because I know even producing a movie, you're still like, when you're already thinking, well, I'm on this project, what's the next thing? It's like, it's the same thing. So the Redemption with...
Redemption of Henry Myers.
Yeah, Harry Myers.
Yep. Well, yeah. So it was Unlimited, then Redemption of Henry Myers, then Hoovie.
That's right.
And so Unlimited and Redemption are 2 films that myself and the director created. Like, I was very involved in the script and the process, and then I obviously produced the film.
So he's awake then? Who shot you in the back?
Will, I apologize for my son. I guess we've forgotten how to trust strangers.
Maybe you shouldn't trust strangers so much, man. You never know what they got lurking in their past.
How come Mr. Henry doesn't stay with us to read?
Well, it must be a little uncomfortable being in somebody else's home.
Or feels guilty for lying to us.
Mr. Henry, are you a field hand?
No. Why ask?
Because when I eat like that, Mama says I'm eating like a field hand.
We're looking for a feller by the name of Henry Myers. I'll come from the money.
Where is it? Where is it, Henry?
Those 2 films were distributed by a singular distributor, and those 2 films were their first 2 films within that whole world. And so that distributor brought Hoovie to me, and I produced Hoovie as well.
I lead our high school to the state finals. After we win, take us to the Final Four. in my first year. That's my plan.
I've got 15 uniforms. Every one of them's available. Let's see who wants them.
Don't go to sleep. You gotta stay awake.
Our dear Lord.
It's a brain tumor, isn't it?
We're gonna get through this.
Am I gonna play again?
One good shot to the head could kill you.
That's official?
Yeah.
It may take a while, but we're back on this team.
Word is, you take one good lick, you're done.
So take your best shot.
I would definitely say that both Redemption and Unlimited are two projects that definitely hold a pretty special place in my heart. They are two projects that I was, along with the director, the most quote unquote responsible for. And again, it has its faults and it was very limited. I mean, we're talking $1 million budgets and less. I mean, we're not talking, big budgets, but they just were great films and the experiences were good and they were great for the director. The actors were great, all of those things. And so, yeah, they definitely were great films to be a part of and really kind of lead the charge. They were very much, from a producing standpoint, they were very much my films. And then Hoovie came along and that was brought to me by this studio. And they kind of said, hey, we want you to produce this thing. And so pretty involved in that one, also creatively worked on the script quite a bit and got it. It was based on a true story. So yeah, they were all great experiences, the teams that were behind them were really, really great. And, unfortunately it was just, the faith space was just still in a very struggling, unknown place.
Right.
And so those films had mediocre success. I mean, they definitely weren't failures, but they were, I would just call them mediocre success.
So it was around, so we're kind of moving the timeline up to about what, 2016, you just wrapped on Hoovie, and then the big $4 million project fell through that you're hoping to get.
Yeah, those three films were probably like 11 through 14, somewhere in there, and there was some smaller little projects here and there. And then in 2015 is when Chris, June, and I started Out of Order Studios. And oddly enough, we met through Redemption. So Chris was at Sony still. Redemption was going to go theatrical. And the distributor we were working with, they were doing this theatrical thing. And they were doing kind of your typical Christian four-wall, get the church involved, help. Even though Redemption had a lot of faith to it. Westerns in general, you always have that forgiveness of faith, right? Like in all Westerns, almost, consistently, the pastor is a well-respected person within the film, within the community, and that sort of thing. So Redemption had that. Chris was helping out in California bring Redemption and do kind of the small little theatrical thing. He had started this kind of side gig, this kind of faith and family film, call it a festival or movement or whatever he was doing with it. And he was helping do that. And then we ended up getting a Hallmark deal. Hallmark had started the Hallmark Film Channel, right? So it wasn't your typical Hallmark stuff. It was more this film channel that they started. I think it's still going, but it may have changed a little bit. But it was one of the first films. So they gave us a really great deal. And we're like, all right, well, who cares about that theatrical thing? Let's take this deal and run with it. Well, the distributor did not do a good job of spreading that word to the people that were helping them with the theatrical. And Chris June was one of them. And Chris literally Facebook messaged the Redemption Facebook page, messaged the page and was like, hey, I'm not getting any response. Not sure what's going on. Are we doing this? Is it going Hallmark? What is it? Right. And nobody from the distributor was responding. I saw the message. So I just kind of jumped in and said, hey, man, I'm the producer of the show. How can I help you? And we just kind of started talking and hit it off. And, we actually got to the point where our wives, as we're sitting in bed at night messaging each other through Facebook, our wives are like, who's this guy you're talking to online? So, we kind of joked and said, Chris and I dated online for a few months, before we actually met. I went to California on a typical business trip, what you do in the business. He was still at Sony and we met, had dinner. And
wait a minute, is that where I met you on the Sony lot? Because you told me you had a meeting because we met in Dallas and then you're like, hey, I'm going to LA. Yep. Wow. What are the odds? And I'm like, hey, I'm going back to LA. That is
funny now that you say that.
Wow.
That's funny. Yeah. So that's when I met with Chris. Wow. And that would have been in 2014.
Wow.
Within months after that meeting with Chris goes, hey, I'm moving to Texas. And I'm like, whoa, too soon, man. Too much. Like we're not there yet with our relationship.
Right.
But Chris grew up in Texas. He grew up in El Paso. His mom lived here in the DFW area, and he just, like so many, had to get out of LA. Had a young family, ended up moving here, and we definitely weren't business partners yet, but we were having the conversation. And the next thing we know, we ended up starting a company and started doing projects, so things took off. And one of the first projects we did was an animated feature. We were developing an animated feature called Rump. It was based on the story of Rumpelstiltskin, and just a kind of a straight family film, not faith or anything like that. But obviously, with Chris's experience in animation, these people approached us about doing this. And oddly enough, we spent 2 years and $4 million developing this project. And we were really we were about to go into full animation. We had done all these animatics and test screenings and all these things, and things were going really, really well. And long story short, basically the investor got bored. Like there was no bad, everything was great. It looked amazing. Everybody was excited about it. And the investor had done a lot of documentaries and stuff like that. So he's used to this very fast turnaround, right, of projects. And it just was like, I just don't know if he was in it for the long haul. So it was an unfortunate thing because it was a great film and we tried to revive it and it just never really couldn't find the money to kind of get it up and going.
Right.
So yeah, that was one of the very first projects that Out of Order did, was a failed animated project. And so, yeah, that probably ended in 16, 17.
Yep.
And at the end of 17 is when I got the call from Dallas. And Dallas he basically had kind of quit the industry, and you can go look up his story. He talks about it all the time, how he had this feature that he did and it failed really bad. And he basically was getting out of the industry, and he was working at a big church up in Chicago, which is where he's from. He was kind of the media director or whatever you want to call it, this big church up there. And they, as a big church, there was a lot of video and film, and they would make short films for holidays. And he had made this Christmas short film, which is The Shepherd, that this whole thing was inspired by. And it just kind of started getting legs. And the distributor, Angel, saw it. Another guy that was this huge YouTube guy by the name of Daryl Eves. And he knows how to engage audiences through social media.
He's
he
amazing.
Literally makes, he makes influencers. That's what he does. Like and he doesn't call them clients, but for lack of a better term, his biggest client is Mr. Beast, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so obviously there's nobody bigger than Mr. Beast. And so he partnered with Dallas, and then Dallas comes to me and he goes, "Hey, made this short film. I've always had a vision to do like a big, long, drawn out TV series on the life of Christ. These guys want to crowdfund it. Do you want to produce?" And I kind of laughed. We kind of probably said it at the same time. We were kind of like, yeah, crowdfunding never works, man. There's no way this is going to work. Like, that's just dumb. But I'm like, you know what? I've known Dallas forever. He's a good friend. I'm like, yeah, let's do it, man. Well, needless to say, we were very wrong on that. And we raised $10 million, $11 million to make season one. A lot of that went towards marketing. It wasn't all production. And then obviously the thing just took off and turned into something crazy for sure. So.
Mother, my time has not yet come.
If not now, when?
I'm ready, Father.
It has begun.
What has?
Miracles.
Signs and wonders. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You have experienced a miracle, Mary.
I saw him. It was incredible.
I was one way, and now I am completely different. And the thing that happened in between was him.
I remember being in Dallas. We went to, I don't know if you remember, it's the Dallas Producers Association party. It was around Christmas. And I remember you telling me this, and I'll be completely honest. I've told you this story again. You told me another Christian that's crowdfunding, we're going to do this, telling Jesus. And I'm like, first thing I thought of, it's going to be cheesy. Second of all, I thought it was like crowdfunding. I've tried to do that, never went anywhere. And then I'm like, how many times has this story been told before? And
100%.
And then fast forward, when I saw it for the first time, which was, I think, on season 2, you guys were actually shooting season 3. I called you, I texted you, I said, brother, amazing, amazing, amazing.
I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Someone touched me.
If you are really the one who is to come, should we look for someone else?
Go and tell John what you hear and see.
Who is it? Why did we stop?
It's him. I'm Judas of Keriot.
I have chosen you 12 as my apostles.
Jesus, if you do not renounce your words, we will have no choice but to follow the law of Moses.
I am the law of Moses.
I just think that is so, it's just amazing to me because, you're always going to have naysayers, right? You got the Monday morning quarterback, and Jacob and I deal with this too when we do projects. It's like, people that are always criticizing the keyboard heroes or someone that says, oh, good luck with that. And my, another tip of the cap to you, man, is like, you guys did it in such a way that you gave, and this is my personal opinion, and I think, you can talk more about it, but you guys gave these characters more of a personal life, like you can relate to them. You gave them personality instead of just like, monotone, same old characters. And I think, and my opinion is that's what audiences love about it. You give them life, you give them personalities, and you can make them relatable to the everyday person.
Right. Well, I mean, scripture says there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be, and it says Jesus was tempted with all the same things, so you can go through scripture and pull all these things out. And so to say that the disciples weren't dealing with what we deal with today, their version of it, right? Again, to say that, they didn't have financial troubles. We talked about marriages, we talked about, work and jobs and, and whether it's, drug addiction, alcohol, whatever the case may be, right? They dealt with all of those things. And we kind of reflect that in the show, rejection or just poor choices, all of those things. And you're absolutely right. That's what really has drawn people to the show, is that people can go, I'm like that. And we've all said it, right? There's certain things in the Bible that we all relate to, right? Any Sunday morning you're sitting in church going, everybody leave. This is just for me, right? The preacher's talking just to me. Everybody's been there, believers or not, they've had those moments. And so to be able to put that into a story that's obviously the greatest story ever told, that's really what it was. And for the longest time, and obviously we're shifting now because we're getting into the crucifixion and we're getting into things, the story wasn't as much about Jesus. It was about the disciples and Mary Magdalene and his mother and all of these people and just their daily lives. And that's honestly been, you're exactly right, that's been the biggest draw to people, is that we just like your story. Like, it's just well written. I care about these characters. Even if I don't believe your mumbo jumbo Jesus stuff, right? I still think and we hear that all the time. And it's some of the best compliments that we get, not necessarily from believers, because to be honest with you, I would say our biggest critics are actually believers, not unbelievers, right? Or non-believers. Just because they're just like, this is just a cool show, right? Like, it's just well written. It's fun. It's funny. It makes me cry. It makes me laugh. All of those things. And so that's kind of one of the biggest things that's definitely kind of turned it into what it's turned into. And obviously now we're definitely getting to some big moments from a biblical standpoint, but we've definitely taken some creative liberties. And Dallas likes to say anything that isn't pulled straight from scripture, there is a ton of effort put into, and the question just becomes, is this plausible? If you look at the historical context, which we have so many people like, historians and biblical scholars and first century scholars, non-biblical scholars that just know Israel or that region really well. And we just ask the question, is this plausible? Is this something they would do in their daily lives? If they were a fisherman or a carpenter or whatever they may be, what's the culture say about this? And so that's a big thing. And so everything that's in there is definitely very plausible for them to go through these struggles that we go through. And then obviously they take scripture and then drop that in every now, because most people are like, oh my gosh, you just totally quoted scripture and I didn't catch it because I was so wrapped up in this moment between Simon Peter and his wife, right? But you actually did just drop some little truth bombs there from the Bible, but it doesn't feel forced, right? Our show is not red letter to red letter, right? And by that, I mean, most Bibles, you open it up and the red letters are when Jesus speaks, right? That's the red letters in the scripture. And that's not our show, right? It's not. In most Jesus shows, if you go back and look at them, not all of them, most of them, it's just, it is miracle to miracle, red letter to red letter. We're going to open up the book of Matthew, the book of John, or wherever it is that talks about the life of Christ. And we're just going to literally shoot what you see in the pages of the Bible. And while we do a lot of that, it's a lot of not that, right? It's just more a plausible story that we put together. And that's definitely what drawn people to it for sure.
That's a powerful approach, showing that plausibility side of it, because like you said, that red letter to red letter approach might have felt a little bit preachy. I like how you leave room for human error and then redemption and growth. It shows that the scripture's applicable to today's life as well, because like you say, there's so many parallels. I have a question for you. I imagine, because I've never done one of these, but a period piece, like a story that takes place, and it's not just like in the Old West or whatever. This is like when the AD and BC thing was getting so.
The flip of the calendar for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Can you dive into maybe a couple of examples of some technical challenges y'all faced on set, having to recreate this world? Because obviously you want to be accurate scripturally, but you got to be accurate visually, and you got to be accurate in sound department. All of these departments have to be on the same page. Can you talk about some of the challenges you faced and the whole crew faced pulling this off? Because it looks amazing, and I imagine that was no easy task.
Well, it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, especially in those early days, this kind of goes back to that budget thing, right? Like when you're making a first century, like nothing exists, right? Like these, we have to make it all. I will say one of my wife's favorite things to do with the production designer, James, I mentioned him earlier. And again, we've known James for 20 years. Actually, I met James on that very first short film that I made with Dallas. Dallas and James, the production designer, were roommates in college. So that's how far that relationship is. So anyways, so we've become friends with James because he's worked on multiple films. Almost every movie you mentioned on this thing, James designed for me. So that was part of why my films look great, because James is an amazing designer. But so one of my favorite games my wife plays with James when they're shooting something, she'll walk up and point at some artifact and he'll be like, TJ Maxx or, home decor. And it's something that he's bought and then, probably manipulated it or painted it or done something to it to make it fit the period, baskets and tables and all these things. And so, but to your point, it's definitely very difficult. And especially in those first couple seasons when we were just so low budget, because that was the desire. The desire was to make it accurate. And a couple of cool stories. We were at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters big event. Actually, it's going on right now. Not that that's going to be weird time wise, because that won't be when this thing airs, but it's happening right now in real life. The big convention. We had this guy come up to us, and we had made this kind of model of a town that we were going to build. We hadn't built the town yet. It now exists in Midlothian. We built a first century town. This was going into probably season 3. And this guy was just sitting there staring at it, and he was looking because we had a trailer playing on a screen beside it. And I just said, "Hey man, can I help you? Can I ask answer some questions?" He goes, "Well, I just want to let you know." He goes, "I am a first century Israel biblical, like that's what I do." He taught in college, like he was this scholar, like that had nothing to do with our show. And he just said, "Look, I just want to let you know this is one of the most accurate things." Like, and he was pointing out these things within our city model. That is right. You put that statue in the right place. You did this, you did that. You placed the houses in a way, because James, he's actually a history major, like James, the designer. So he just has this desire to make it accurate. Our costume designer, Leila, she's the same way. And so there's just this desire to do it. Right. And we didn't have money. So it was like, okay, how do we do it on a budget and still make it great? And another funny story on season 1, when season 1 first came out and the show started getting legs and getting out there, we started seeing all these comments going, "Oh, thank you so much for going to Israel and shooting the show. It really means a lot that you would actually go to Jerusalem, you'd go to Capernaum and shoot the show." We just kind of go, "Listen, darling, that's just East Texas." I mean, and this was my point earlier, right? This is, we're not quite the motherland, but we're a close second, right behind, God's favored nation, that is Israel. And so, but oddly enough, there's a lot of very similar, topographical similarities between Texas. Even if you look on the globe, it's a similar longitude and all those types of things. And so
Right.
it's definitely been a fun thing to kind of go, we accept that challenge. We accept that challenge to do exactly what you're saying. And again, that's definitely a lot where I come in, and that's that crappy Christian film. Like it can't be bad, right? Dallas did such an amazing job casting. We have amazing cast. Jonathan and, Liz, who plays Mary Magdalene, is she's my weak spot, I say, because that in season 1, episode 1, the very last scene of episode 1, when Jesus calls Mary Magdalene, which is biblical, it's in the Bible, where he calls her by name, calls her to him by name. It just wrecks me every time. Right. And there's just so many people that can relate to that, women that have, been through certain things, or, abuse or turmoil or whatever the case is. And so, it just really is, again, it's that perfect storm. James as a designer, Leila as a costume designer, Akis as our DP, all the teams that they put together and oversee, and then we as production and the team that we have to just kind of help facilitate those things and give Dallas that space to go create and do what he does.
Right. So that's awesome, man. So right now, as we speak, you're on pretty much the first few weeks of releasing season 5.
I do believe that Jesus is most likely the Messiah.
Why?
Why what?
Why do you believe that?
I've seen too much.
Then why are you doing this?
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees!
Stop this at once!
The world is changing, and Jesus offers a vision to redeem it.
He's not the Messiah!
Tell him that God's gonna cut you down.
Declaring yourself a sovereign. Rome will descend on us all!
Gonna cut you down.
Briefly talk about that, and then to, talk about season 6 that you're shooting right now real quick.
So season 5 comes out end of March. And so we're doing a theatrical as well. That's another weird thing that we did. We started doing theatrical releases for a TV show. There's no TV shows that go theatrical, but it was just something that we kind of, I want to say the first time we did it was maybe season 3. Actually, I think we did a Christmas special, kind of like a little offshoot Christmas special music thing. And just people came out, but this was like during COVID and all these things where people were just begging to get out of the house. Like, give me a reason to get out of the house. And so we started doing these theatrical releases, putting a couple episodes together and putting them in theaters. And it's just been such a huge success. And not a huge financial success. They do pretty good, but it's just the engagement that it does, the sense of ownership that our audience has to be able to go and share those moments in a movie theater. So season 5 hits theaters the end of March of this year, 2025, and then we start shooting season 6 in April of 2025. And so season 5 is Holy Week. So it all kind of takes place in 1 week. Season 5, it's about to come out, is all in 1 week. And season 6 that we're about to do is the Crucifixion. And literally the whole season is in 24 hours. So all 8 episodes will be 24 hours. So funny looking back in season 2 when we finally realized, this show's actually probably going to do something. We all kind of sat back and we're like, oh no, we have to do the Crucifixion. That kind of sucks. Like that's going to be rough, right? And now we're here and we're all going, this is going to be rough, right? And so we're here.
When you're doing this theatrical release, you have 8 episodes, and you're going to be showing all 8 episodes. Are they going to be spaced out as they are released, or are you doing them all?
Yeah, we've done a couple of different versions. Like I think the first time we did it, we only did like the first 2 episodes and the last 2 episodes, and we put them together, right? As because 2 episodes is about an hour and a half. Each episode's 45 minutes to an hour, so every block is about that. Last couple of years, we've been kind of doing like 3, 3, and 2, right? And so or whatever the case is, we'll kind of just block them that way. 3 episodes every now and then. You got to kind of pick like, you don't want 3 episodes that are all 62 minutes each, right? You're like, oh my gosh, we're going to be in the theater for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And so we try to kind of figure it out. And obviously that's not our focus. Our focus isn't linked, it's just kind of that thing. So yeah, we do separate releases, and we'll do a couple episodes. And the first time we did it, we let them run for a long time and they did really well. Now we're more like, we just do it for like a week or 2 per block of episodes. And then obviously it'll start coming out online after that, so all the streamers and stuff like that. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yep. And so after season 6, are you guys going to try to extend another season, or are you going to try to? What's the future of the project
Sure.
after 6?
Yeah, so there's always been a 7 planned. So seven
Okay.
is happening, and it's the resurrection, right? So in the
Okay.
Bible, it talks about how the disciples scatter and like, oh my gosh, he died. He wasn't supposed to die.
Right.
Like he did die. Like that was not, maybe he wasn't the savior.
Right.
All these things, right? And so the scattering of the disciples, and then obviously the resurrection is, we like to say, look, obviously the cross and this death on the cross is very important, but really, if you think about it, the more important part of that story is that he rose again, right? He was resurrected, and nobody did it for him. Jesus brought people back from the dead, but that was Jesus doing it. Jesus brought himself back, right? Him and God said, okay, time to go back. And he jumped back up there and did his thing. And so obviously there is a season 7, and that will come after 6. So, we have a couple years left of The Chosen. And then within the Chosen world, there's a pretty big, book of source material that we have to pick from story wise. And so we have announced, Moses, Joseph, and Book of Acts are things that we're going to be doing after that. Exactly what we'll be a part of, because Dallas, obviously it's kind of his world. This whole thing is his world, but even he's not going to be a part of all those outside of just kind of producing and overseeing and stuff like that. And so Chris and I, as the producers, will definitely be involved at some level, whether it's as little as consulting, or we may actually produce. There's certain ones where we're like, ooh, Moses would be cool.
Yeah.
But then you're like, oh, but Book of Acts would be good because that's the continuation of the story we're doing now. But then you're like, oh, well, Joseph is a great story. So there's just all these things now. So now it's just about figuring out what makes the most sense, and how can we expand this team and continue to make great content. And we've kind of created a standard, and Chris and I as producers were kind of like, this is the new bar, right? We want everything to be as good, if not better, than The Chosen.
Yeah.
Right. That's our goal as a production company, as our goal as producers. And obviously, if we can continue to work with Dallas and that team, that'd be great. We're not Out of Order is a hired production company to produce the show. Dallas has his company, which is called 5 and 2. And Chris and I aren't a part of that company. We're Out of Order Studios. And so 5 and 2 hires Out of Order to produce the show. So, but again, our relationship goes way back, and I'm sure there's going to be more collaborations in the future.
That's awesome. I have one last question for you, Chad. So I get this question asked a lot, and it's kind of like I kind of always get the side eye on people. I have a few people ask me, Nathan, what legacy do you want to leave behind? And I kind of just sit there. I'm like, isn't that kind of when you're at the tail end of your life? But then I started thinking, I was like, well, I would tell them, like, well, certain things. And then I would say, well, the story's still being written as we speak.
Right.
And you've done a lot of redemption stories, and I see those internal conflicts. And then you catapulted to The Chosen, where that story is happening, and it's Christ redeeming. And what would you say if it would all end, as you said earlier, tomorrow? What would people say about you, and what would you want people to know about you?
Yeah, this is me side-eyeing you for sure. There's important things like, especially as I've been doing this longer. And again, the focus started, but it's become more important. Obviously, my family is the most important thing. I think, the story's always told. People on their deathbed never talk about, oh, I wish I could have worked more. Oh, I wish I could have whatever more. Or, it's always about their family and their friends and what they could have done. And so obviously that's really important. But I think probably one of the biggest things, and it's probably because I've heard it so much, and because I've heard it so much, I always kind of look to God and kind of go, what is it that they're saying when they say this? And something that I hear a lot is, Chad, there's something different about you. There's something different, whether it's an expectation when they see me, right? When they meet me, when they hear what I do for a living, when they know what my past is, when they find out I'm from a small town in Texas, all of these assumptions that people have, especially in our industry, and this as well as I do, producers don't necessarily have a good reputation. They just don't. They just it's yelling and screaming, and I'm and this and that, and you're fired and all those things, and I'm just not a yeller and a screamer. Yes, I fired a lot of people. I fired one just the other day, but I the guy I fired the other day, he actually thanked me by the end of the conversation, right? Wow. Because I do care. Like, I do have a desire to see people be better at what they do, and as a producer, that's what I've always wanted: is how can I help you? Not necessarily how can you help me, But I think if that's the mentality, if I'm sitting here going, Jacob, Nathan, what can I do to help you? What can I do to make your lives better? How can I help you with your work? How can I help you with your marriage? Whatever it is. And then you sit there and do it back to me. Well, that's the relationship you want. It's not one-sided, right? This is a give and take sort of situation. And that's kind of one of the big things. And so I think that's probably what I would want is like, there's something different about that guy. There's just something different about that guy. And when I do hear that, when I get that comment, whether it's on set or from a crew member or from a cast member, people are like, this is unique, Chad. I've never met a producer like you. I've never met somebody in this industry, especially for those that have been around a long time. And to be honest with you, I just go, well, there's my big swinging door to go talk about the faith, right? Because I'm not going to shove it down your throat. Now, I will never shy away from, preaching the gospel, talking about my relationship, all those things. But at the same time, like, we work in an industry that we work in, and our industry is not necessarily faith friendly. Let's just not pretend for a second. And to be really clear, we don't always hire believers. We hire the best person for the job, period, full stop. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you believe. I don't care about any of those things. Now, because it's my movie, there's going to be certain things, I create standards. There's certain things we allow and don't allow, but I never do it in an accusational way. And probably one of the best things to say is that when people, like, we don't tell people they can't cuss on set. Now, if somebody goes on some big rampage and they drop every F-bob and GD this and all that, we may kind of go, okay, that's enough. Like, but to be honest with you, I think that would happen even in Hollywood. If you start going on a rampage, even somebody's going to go, okay, dude, just, chill, like calm down a little bit. But what we find is all of a sudden they'll let a little something slip and they'll kind of go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. I didn't tell you not to say that. But again, when you create an environment where that's not the norm, to yell and scream and be angry and, and accuse people and do all those things, well, then hopefully that kind of trickles down and it becomes that environment. And that's when we get the comments of, there's something different about this. There's something different about your sets, Chad. There's something different about that. So from a work standpoint, I would say that's the legacy, is that there's something different about that guy. And then obviously we can get into details. But obviously at the end of the day, I mean, you guys have families. And so that's the most important. Nothing's, my son's in college, my daughter's in high school. That's my focus. And, I want what's best for them. I want my wife to, live a happy life. We all know the comment, right? Happy wife, happy life. And that's, that's my whole goal. But I want that for her. I want those things. And as men, that's a desire that we have, is to provide and to give and to have purpose and all those things. And so hopefully that's another comment too, that, hey, you were just kind of a different dad, because our industry doesn't do that either, right? It's all about, not good stories a lot of times in our industry. And so we all have our problems. We all have things that we have to deal with. But the question is more about how you deal with them. And hopefully it's different. So never answered it that way, but that's my answer, is hopefully it's something different about that guy.
And that was great, man. Thank you, Chad, for being a part of this, man.
Come on,
Thank you. Hey guys, thanks for checking out our podcast. To watch more videos like this, subscribe to our channel. We're featuring many filmmaking guests like writers, producers, directors, and actors. You can also stream this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music if you're on the go. We'll see you in the next one.